In the shadows of power and ambition, one man's reign in Liberia loomed large and ominous. With a trail of blood and betrayal in his wake, his rule was a dark chapter in the nation's history, marked by brutality and tyranny. This story unravels the mysterious persona of a president whose iron-fisted grip on power left a legacy of fear and oppression. Welcome, and be prepared to be captivated as we unravel the triumphs, controversies, and defining moments that shaped Samuel K. Doe's journey. Samuel Canyon Doe was born on May 6, 1951, in Tucson, a small village nestled in Grand Gaita County. Coming from the Kron community, a significant indigenous minority in the region, his upbringing was rooted in this cultural background. Doe completed his elementary education and pursued further studies at a Baptist junior high school in Zwedru. However, his aspirations for higher education took a different turn when he enlisted in the Armed Forces of Liberia, aiming to secure a scholarship to a high school in Kakata. Despite his hopes, he found himself immersed in military duties instead. Over the following decade, Doe's journey within the military took him through various roles, from educational pursuits in military schools to commanding garrisons and prisons in Monrovia. Despite the challenges, he persevered, eventually completing his high school education through correspondence. In recognition of his skills and dedication, Doe rose through the ranks, achieving the position of Master Sergeant on October 11, 1979. He was subsequently appointed as an administrator for the 3rd Battalion in Monrovia, a role he held for 11 months, marking a significant milestone in his military career. Doe, like many indigenous Liberians, resented the power and dominance of the Americo-Liberians who had governed since the 1800s. On April 12, 1980, he orchestrated a coup d'etat that toppled the true Whig administration. Leading a group of 16 military personnel, Master Sergeant Doe orchestrated the overthrow, resulting in the death of President Tolbert and 26 others at the Executive Mansion. Shortly after, they declared on national radio the end of the Tolbert government. Now, let's delve into the narrative of the Americo-Liberians. In the early 1800s, amidst debates over the status and rights of African Americans, the United States took a significant step by supporting the establishment of a colony in Liberia, then known as the Grain Coast. Congress allocated funds to send freeborn blacks and emancipated slaves to this new colony. The idea of repatriating blacks to West Africa stirred controversy among African Americans. While some believed in staying to fight for equality and freedom in the United States, others saw promise in the opportunity for their own land in Liberia. However, suspicions lingered regarding the motives of the American Colonization Society, with some Quaker members advocating for liberty in a separate country and slaveholder members driven by selfish and racist motives to remove potential threats of slave rebellion. In 1822, the first group of freed African American slaves arrived on the Grain Coast, founding the settlement of Monrovia, named after President James Monroe. Over the following 4 decades, thousands of African Americans and a small number of West Indians settled in Liberia. Initially governed by white agents of the ACS, Liberia eventually transitioned to self-governance by the settlers, who declared independence from the United States on July 26, 1847. They attempted to recreate an American society while also integrating with indigenous populations. Liberia adopted a constitution and flag modeled after that of America, and although the U.S. shifted from controlling Liberia to providing assistance, settler values persisted, with the first president and his cabinet being American-born and educated. For 133 years, the Americo-Liberians dominated political power through the true Whig Party, creating a one-party state. President William V.S. Tubman, who led Liberia from 1944 to 1971, focused on fostering foreign investment and bridging the gap between the settlers and the indigenous Africans by maintaining the Western lifestyles, language, and political institutions. The transformation from a white-run colony to a black-run republic marked a significant milestone. Nevertheless, Liberia continued to rely on financial support from the U.S. despite its newfound independence. Liberia's agricultural sector thrived, yet the absence of industrialization left it vulnerable. Facing financial strain in the 1860s, Liberia turned to Europe and the United States for high-interest loans, sparking a prolonged period of economic dependence. During World War I, Liberia wanted to be friends with the United States, so they declared war on Germany, who they used to trade with a lot. But this decision backfired when a German submarine bombed the capital city, Monrovia. As a result, Liberia suffered significant financial losses due to its inability to trade with Germany. In the 1920s, the United States saw that Liberia needed funds and decided to take advantage of them. They wanted rubber, which was in high demand because of cars. So a big company called Firestone Tire and Rubber Company made a deal with Liberia backed by the U.S. government. The agreement heavily favored Firestone at Liberia's expense. Under the agreement, Firestone would acquire 1 million acres of land on a 99-year lease at a very low rate. Additionally, Firestone would keep any valuable resources found on the land, like gold or diamonds, and Liberia would accept a $5 million loan from Firestone to settle all outstanding foreign debts over 40 years, essentially replacing old debt with new debt. This arrangement enriched the Liberian elite and aligned with U.S. military interests. During World War II, the U.S. established a base near Monrovia for refueling and maintaining aircrafts. The President of the United States at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, visited Liberia during the war, which made Liberia feel important as though they had a special relationship with the United States. However, in reality, Liberia was mainly viewed as a resource for the United States to exploit for its own interests. The U.S. supported Liberia with foreign aid, but not without a specific agenda. When World War II ended and the Cold War started, the U.S. saw Liberia as a good place to stop communism from spreading in Africa. They signed a defense pact with Liberia and built communication facilities there to monitor broadcasts and relay information throughout the continent. President Kennedy also started programs like the Peace Corps and provided economic and military aid to Liberia. Between 1962 and 1980, Liberia received $280 million from the U.S., the highest per capita aid to any African country. In return, Liberia provided land for U.S. facilities rent-free and aligned with the U.S. on Cold War issues at the United Nations. This alliance allowed the U.S. to maintain a strong presence in a region where other countries were striving to break free from colonial rule. Things changed when William R. Tolbert became president after Tubman's death. Tolbert wanted Liberia to be more independent, so he welcomed ambassadors from countries like the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba. He also stopped being friends with Israel during the Yom Kippur War in 1973 and supported the rights of the Palestinian people. Additionally, Tolbert renegotiated a better deal with Firestone and encouraged more freedom in politics and the economy. In 1978, U.S. President Jimmy Carter visited Liberia, marking it the first official visit by an American president since FDR's quick stop during World War II simply to visit U.S. troops. This might have shown that the relationship between the U.S. and Liberia wasn't as close as Liberia thought it was. However, any previous concerns about the U.S. relationship with Tolbert came to an end by the 1980 coup, orchestrated by Master Sergeant Samuel K. Doe. After the coup, Doe became a general and set up a group called the People's Redemption Council to run Liberia. This council included Doe and 14 other officers with low ranks. He stopped Liberia's constitution until 1984, when a new constitution was ratified through a popular vote. In 1985, he won a presidential election that was widely criticized as fraudulent. He became the first president of the Second Republic of Liberia in January 1986. During his rule, Doe portrayed himself as a progressive leader striving to bring relief to the people. He styled himself as Dr. Doe in 1982 after receiving an honorary doctorate from the University of Seoul during a state visit to South Korea. Maintaining this title for 7 years, Doe later announced in 1989 that he had obtained a bachelor's degree from the University of Liberia. Despite the violent nature of Doe's rise to power, the U.S. backed him, viewing him much like many Liberians did initially, as a leader of indigenous heritage capable of democratizing Liberia and breaking the political dominance of settler descendants. In the initial years of his presidency, Doe openly aligned with U.S. Cold War foreign policy in Africa during the 1980s, cutting diplomatic ties between Liberia and the Soviet Union. He quickly became an important Cold War ally, and within the initial 5 years of his leadership, the U.S. provided Liberia with $500 million in aid to support these efforts. In return, Doe did close to everything he was asked to do. He allowed the U.S. to use Liberia's ports for deploying security forces globally, shut down the Libyan mission in Monrovia, downsized the Soviet embassy, and restored diplomatic ties with Israel. Over time, Doe's government became more corrupt and oppressive, suppressing political opposition and censoring the press. Human rights abuses were common, and there were suspicions that some of the aid from the United States ended up in Doe's pockets. Eventually, due to political pressure and embarrassment, the U.S. persuaded Doe to hold an election in 1985. According to official records, Doe won 51% of the vote, just enough to avoid a second round of voting. He had the ballots taken to a secret location, and 50 of his own chosen staff counted them. Foreign observers said the elections were not fair and suggested that Jackson Doe from the Liberian Action Party might have actually won. The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Africa justified this by arguing that imperfect elections were still a step towards democracy, and that such practices were unfortunately common in African elections at that time. Before the election, some believe he changed his birth year from 1951 to 1950 to meet the new requirement that the president must be at least 35 years old. He stated that if he lost the election, he wouldn't give up power and the army would seize control within 2 weeks. Although the official results said he got the most votes, the U.S. State Department accused the election of being heavily fraudulent. He took office as president on January 6, 1986, and his inauguration featured performances by Liberian dancers and a military parade. Many Liberians and Americans living in Liberia were angry about the U.S. government's ongoing support for Doe. Despite resolutions passed by the U.S. House and Senate demanding an end to aid, the Reagan administration, driven by Cold War worries, continued providing assistance. Liberians hoped the U.S. would intervene to remove Doe from power, or at least pressure him to stop mistreating certain ethnic groups. But despite the U.S. being unhappy with Doe's actions, they hardly got involved. General Thomas Kwiwonkpa, who was part of the 1980 coup with Doe, tried to take over power on November 12, 1985. The attempt failed after fighting in Monrovia, where Kwiwonkpa was killed. Afterward, Doe declared a curfew at 6 p.m., threatening to execute anyone found on the streets. After the failed coup, his government became even more oppressive, shutting down newspapers and stopping political activities. During the latter part of his presidency, Doe prioritized agricultural development, urging people to cultivate their own food through the Go Back to the Soil campaign. Government officials, including ministers, were encouraged to start farms in their hometowns, aiming to reduce Liberia's dependence on imported food, especially rice. Additionally, he initiated family planning and clean environment programs to address population growth and environmental concerns. In the late 1980s, he launched various development projects, including the construction and expansion of the SKD Stadium at the UL Fendel campus. Other projects, such as the Health Ministry and Defense Ministry buildings, were also underway, with the intention of establishing government-owned office spaces instead of renting properties. In 1989, the Cold War ended, and the United States lost interest in Liberia's political affairs. Charles Taylor, who grew up near Monrovia, returned to Liberia in 1979 after a change in government. He gained a high position in Samuel Doe's administration, but was accused of stealing $1 million while in charge of the country's General Services Administration. Taylor fled to the United States, where he was arrested and jailed in Plymouth County. In 1985, he escaped by cutting through bars and climbing down a sheet, avoiding extradition to Liberia. On December 24, 1989, Taylor entered Liberia from Ivory Coast and started a terrible 7-year-long conflict. The conflict turned into a big civil war. Many Liberians left the country, and lots of people, both soldiers and citizens, were hurt, killed, tortured, or raped. The fighting went on for a long time, and by the middle of the 1990s, most of Liberia was controlled by different rebel groups. About 600 people were killed at a church in Monrovia. 30 soldiers who were loyal to Doe carried out the massacre. These soldiers were from Doe's Kron tribe, and most of the people killed were from the Gio and Mano tribes, who supported the rebels fighting against Doe. As the conflict escalated, numerous Liberians looked to the United States for assistance in removing Doe from power and facilitating peace. However, the U.S. neither ousted Doe nor supported him. Instead, they only helped evacuate American citizens from Liberia in 1990. On September 9, 1990, President Samuel Keon Doe was captured by Prince Johnson, leader of a faction that broke away from Taylor's NPFL. General Kwainu, in charge of ECOMOG, had invited Doe to the ECOMOG headquarters for a meeting, promising his safety from the rebels. However, when Doe arrived, there was a change in guard duty from the well-armed Nigerian peacekeepers to the weaker Gambian contingent. This shift in security left Doe vulnerable. Johnson's rebels unexpectedly arrived, heavily armed, and caught everyone off guard. They quickly overpowered Doe's lightly armed team, shooting them one by one. Doe was shot in the leg and taken captive. Despite the chaos, none of the ECOMOG personnel were harmed in the attack. Doe was taken to Johnson's military base, where a horrifying ordeal awaited him. Johnson, aiming to dispel any belief in black magic protection, ordered Doe's ears to be cut off in front of him with shackles fastened around his legs. The brutality continued as Doe was forced to stand, while some of his fingers were amputated. After enduring 12 hours of torture at Johnson's hands, Doe was ultimately killed. His body was shaved and displayed naked in Monrovia's streets with cigarette burns. The gruesome spectacle of his torture was captured on videotape and broadcasted in news reports nationwide. With Doe's demise, many rejoiced thinking the war was over and Taylor would become president. Ultimately, it was a combination of regional and international pressure, along with negotiations, that led to the end of the Civil War. The ECOWAS played a crucial role in brokering peace talks, which resulted in the signing of the Cotonou Peace Agreement in 1993. This agreement led to the formation of a transitional government and paved the way for democratic elections in Liberia. Charles Taylor eventually ran for president, using the infamous slogan, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will vote for him." The ECOWAS monitored the elections, and in 1997, Charles Taylor was elected as president. Many Liberians hoped that Taylor would bring an end to the violence. Although the bloodshed did decrease, it did not completely stop. There was widespread fear that if Taylor lost, the war would resume. After his win, Liberia experienced some peace, leading refugees to return. By 1999, a new rebel group formed by Liberian exiles in West Africa, called the United for Reconciliation and Democracy, started attacking government forces with the aim of overthrowing President Charles Taylor. This plunged Liberia into a second civil war that lasted from 1999 to 2003. Violent incidents continued to occur frequently, and Taylor faced accusations of supporting guerrilla fighters in neighboring nations like Sierra Leone. He was also accused of using money from diamond sales to purchase weapons for rebel groups and for his personal luxuries. The unrest that simmered during the late 1990s reflected a significant decline in the national economy and the widespread exchange of diamonds and timber for firearms. In 2003, a new armed group called the Movement for Democracy in Liberia emerged with the aim of also removing Taylor from office. As the conflict escalated and casualties increased, Taylor's government only had control over a small portion of the country. Intensifying pressure from the international community and with lured and model rebels advancing, Taylor stepped down as president and sought refuge in Nigeria. On August 18, 2003, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed, ending a 14-year-long conflict that resulted in the loss of an estimated 250,000 lives. The conflicts involved severe human rights abuses such as the killing of civilians, torture, rape, forced child soldier recruitment, theft, and destruction of cultural heritage. In 2006, Taylor was sent to The Hague to be prosecuted by the Special Court for Sierra Leone. He was found guilty of 11 counts of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious violations of international law committed during Sierra Leone's civil war. Taylor is now serving a 50-year sentence and has never been tried for his alleged crimes in Liberia. Today, the U.S. helps Liberia by supporting humanitarian services like healthcare, education, and social programs through organizations like the United Nations and non-governmental groups. This assistance aims to help Liberians rebuild their lives and their country after years of war. However, the amount of help from the U.S. has decreased a lot since the 1980s. There are differing opinions on whether the U.S. should have intervened more in the Liberian Civil War. Some argue that the U.S. had a moral obligation to prevent the destruction in Liberia. Others believe that Liberia's fate should be left to its citizens. Currently, the question of what the U.S. should do in Liberia is complicated and involves thinking about the past, present, and future of both countries. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments down below. Until next time.